back, everybody. This is another episode of the Exodus Project. As always, I'm your host, Steve Eisenhower. I am joined with my good friend Davon Mays from Clouds of Torah. Check him out. Check out his YouTube channel, all his books, some of which are linked in the description. He's got lots of great content, some of which I'm in, and as always, he's on my channel a lot as well. But before we get started, everyone, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, give Davon and I a big thumbs up, and we're going to talk about why Christ died in vain. Quite the title.
Quite the title.
Okay, and then just let me know when you see it.
All right, Christ died in vain.
Little gory.
Gory. That's how he's depicted all over the place, though. You know what I mean?
Watch Passion of the Christ.
The more beat up, the more
blood,
people
guts everywhere.
seem to like him. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Galatians 2:21.
Galatians 2:21. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing.
Or in other translations, Christ died in vain. So, as I point out, this is the only time Paul and I agree. What do you think? Is that the only time you and Paul actually agree on something?
I wouldn't say the only time, but it's one of my favorite times to agree with him, because he does say some things that are like, okay, that's true. Romans 2:13 is, that's true. But overall, this is one of my favorite times to agree with Paul, because it's not like I don't like to agree with Paul. It's just I can't.
Yeah, he dug his own grave. Yeah.
It's like, I can't do that.
There's a verse in 2 Corinthians I agree with him on too. He's talking about all his boastings, and he says, I sound like a madman. I'm like, yeah, you do, buddy.
Yeah, he does. As much as he says don't boast, he does a lot of boasting.
Yeah. Okay. So he says, well, let me go to that black slide. So he says, if righteousness could be gained through the law, then Christ died in vain, right? Christ died for nothing. Well, I'm going to preface this next slide by stating that, Christian tradition states that Luke was his ministerial partner, right? He was a companion of Paul. And we talked about this before, that he was, you see that in the book of Acts, and also in some of the epistles, I think it mentions Luke's name, that he and Paul were traveling, throughout Asia Minor, etc. And that's often why Luke Acts gets the name Luke, because it seems like, a Paul fanboy type book, right? But we're going to see here shortly that Luke does not agree with that statement. Luke does not agree with Galatians 2:21. Even a little bit. So if they were ministerial partners, either they were at odds about, the most basic of theology, or Luke didn't write Luke.
Or Luke's gospel disagrees with Paul. Could it be?
Right.
Luke's got his own gospel. And he said he had the best one. He was like, I went and researched it all, right?
Right.
There's many versions out there, but I got the good one, Theophilus. Right?
Yeah. Yep. I got a whole video on him. So
right, let's see what's going on and why we agree with Paul on Galatians 2:21.
Right. And just one final thing, because he's not necessarily saying that the law or the Torah worked prior to Jesus either. Like Galatians 2:21 is proposing that if it ever worked, there was no need for Jesus's death. Right? He's not simply saying that it worked then, now we have something else. No, he's saying it didn't work, and there was that necessitated Jesus's death, right? We can agree on that.
Pretty much.
When he says if righteousness could be gained through the law, that's basically saying it doesn't work, never worked.
Yeah.
Jesus needed to die because it didn't work.
And that's why he doesn't set aside the grace of God. So if he doesn't set aside the grace of God, I do not set aside the grace of God. So what exactly is grace? Grace can be translated as favor. And, basically, if you read Isaiah 26, verse 10, it says, if you give grace to the wicked, they will not become righteous. So grace doesn't really work for Paul like he thinks it does. And the Christian idea of grace is basically like a get out of jail free card. Like, oh, I'm not under the law, I'm under the grace. So even if I break the law, I have this grace to save me. But
Right.
Isaiah, whom the Christians love to quote Isaiah 26:10 says, if you give grace to the wicked, they will not learn righteousness.
Right.
So
that's exactly
you
right.
just rely on grace. You have
Mm-hmm.
to do stuff. And we're going to talk about that later too.
And in that same vein, before we go to the next slide, this will be the last thing. In that same vein, Solomon says in Proverbs that the sacrifice or the offering of a wicked man is an abomination.
This is true.
So if Jesus died for the wicked without any type of, penitence, any type of repentant heart initially, how abominable is that? If he's dying on behalf of billions of wicked people, that's pretty abominable.
And it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
if they're still gonna, be showing out, then it's like, okay, that's like paying off somebody's debt and then they go and run it right back up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. All right. Luke 1, 5, and 6.
In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And they were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord. Oh, wow.
Mic drop.
What will Paul do with that?
It says it right there. Luke says it outright. They were both righteous before God, aka justified in right standing, right? They were both in right standing before God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments.
So, how is this possible? How is that possible if you can't be righteous no matter what you do according to your works? Keeping the commandments will not work for you, but somehow Luke thought it was appropriate to tell us that it does work. And he gave us two witnesses, one being a priest and his wife, and actually the mother and father of John the Baptist.
Exactly. Who Jesus himself says was the greatest man born of woman.
That's what he says. And if Jesus was born of woman, he says John is greater than him.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is it uses the word righteous and blameless. Now, if that's not possible, then why would Luke say that? So let me use the Christian excuse. This was before Jesus. So it was possible at a point in time, right? John's not born yet, and he's older than Jesus. So at this point in time, since they're still under the law, because Galatians also says Jesus was born under the law. So before Jesus was born, it was possible to gain this righteousness in the law. But as soon as Jesus was baptized, some say when he was born, some say when he was baptized, and then some say, well, when he died, that's
according to Galatians, it would have to be when he died.
Right, but depending on the doctrine, right? Because some play the game. Well, it was up until he was born, then it was when he was baptized, and then the final one is, of course, when as soon as he died, then that nullifies Luke 1, 5, and 6, right? So we're going to lay out, because we like to be thorough, we're going to lay out every excuse to get rid of Luke 1, 5, and 6.
Cool. Well, let me pause. And just go back to what we said on that previous slide, that when Paul wrote Galatians 2:21, he says, if it were possible that you could attain righteousness through the law, then Christ died in vain. He didn't say if it were possible after Christ died. He just said if it were possible.
Right.
Period. Meaning at any point you
Right.
can't be righteous through the law. It's just a mirror to condemn you. He says that in the mirror. That's in Corinthians, I believe. That it's just a mirror to show you your shortcomings.
You're a sinner. Right. So right here we see it definitely was possible. And of course we know this, now this is in the New Testament, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we stay in the New Testament, because we could of course go into the Torah and show you so many people who were righteous and walked with God and men of God, and he was righteous and all these things. But the Christian will say, well, that's the Old Testament. We don't really need that, right? Paul says, that's a veil, right? So we're going to stand in the New Testament. In Matthew, it calls Joseph righteous.
Mm-hmm.
How was he righteous if he wasn't keeping the law? He also had to be keeping the law to be called righteous.
Right.
So
in the Christian worldview, what set Mary apart to be worthy of giving birth to Jesus?
She was a virgin.
In the Orthodox worldview, not just the virgin birth, but the Immaculate Conception isn't about Jesus. I don't know how many people know that. In Orthodox Christianity, the Immaculate Conception is not about Jesus. That's about Mary, saying that even Mary's mother didn't have sex.
Right. Even Mary was born of a virgin. So
why is she not the Messiah?
Know that part, because that's an oral tradition. We don't do oral traditions in Christianity according to the church, right? That's what a Christian will say. Solo
Which Christian? Which Christian? Because 2 Thessalonians, Paul says outright, if it's not a tradition we gave you in writing or orally, you got to reject it. And I will hear Catholics use that against Protestants to say we have it right, y'all don't.
Yeah, that's a fight, right? Kings of or gangs of New York, right? That's a fight right there. So we're just giving y'all a bunch of different angles to approach this. Different churches, different doctrines, and Paul versus Luke. I mean, it's very simple. He said it wasn't possible, and Luke says it was.
Mm-hmm. Paul is an abomination, according to King Solomon here in Proverbs 17:15. Go ahead, Davon.
He who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous are both like an abomination to the Lord. He who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous are both alike an abomination to the Lord. Romans 3:9. What then? Are we Jews any better off? No, not at all. For we have already charged that all, both Jews and Greeks, are under sin. As it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. No one understands, no one seeks for God. All have turned aside, together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one.
So it seems he's not really leaving any room for anybody. This is a blanket statement saying every human being, period, falls under the curse of sin. None are righteous, no, not one.
So the interesting thing, first in Proverbs, he's justifying the wicked by saying you can be wicked as long as you believe in Jesus and accept the blood and all these things. And you're condemning anybody righteous, saying you can't be righteous. So anybody who was deemed righteous, you can't do it. So he's saying Luke and Elizabeth and Zechariah in Luke, they weren't righteous. They can't be because it's not possible.
Mm-hmm.
So he's basically telling Luke, you're a liar.
Exactly.
That's pretty much what he's saying, because he's saying you're under sin and it's not possible. And the only reason he can say this is because Paul does what Paul does, and he has stripped the context of what he quoted, and he is omitting the beginning
Right.
of the chapter.
Exactly. And even further, when he says that Jews and Greeks, aka Jews and Gentiles, are under sin, like, what's the context? You know, this is where the condemning the righteous really comes in. What's the context? So if you're under sin, he's insinuating that you have the curse of death upon you,
Right.
that you're born condemned, right? So if he purports this, he is in fact condemning you. He's condemning you to a spiritual death because you're under sin.
And there's nothing you can do about it, and there's nothing you could have ever done about it.
Right. And if you're a Christian listening to this, you know we're not spinning anything when we say this. You know, Davon and I were both Christians. We're not presenting this in a way that your pastor doesn't present it every Sunday. Right? How many times have you heard
without the blood?
Yeah. How many times have you heard Pastor KJV only up front saying, "None is righteous, no, not one. Thank God for the blood." Right? How many times have all of y'all heard that? That's straight out of Paul.
Straight out of Paul.
So
and go ahead.
What he's saying is, under sin, he's referencing original sin and that we're all condemned to death without the sacrifice of Jesus. That's the context. That's a condemnation.
And he's not telling you so many things. For instance, Genesis 4, 6, and 7, you shall rule over sin.
Yeah, it crouches at the door, but you can conquer it.
You can rule over. Why would God tell Cain he could rule over sin if it was not possible? Why would God give any commandments if they were not possible to keep? Because we clearly read in Genesis 26, Abraham kept my laws.
Yep.
It didn't say I gave Abraham laws and he tried to keep them. No, it clearly says because Abraham obeyed my voice, kept my charge, my statutes, and my laws.
Yep.
How is that possible if Paul's saying you can't? So you got Luke saying Zacharias and Elizabeth did it. We got Moses saying Abraham did it. And comes Paul, nope, not possible, not one. And I remove the context so you don't even know where this is coming from.
Right. Solomon, the righteous will fall 7 times and rise, but the wicked shall stumble over sin. If you can fall, if you can keep sinning, but if you get up, repent, and still be righteous, how does that mesh at all with what Paul's saying?
You can't do it. Paul's condemning the righteous. He's saying you can't be righteous.
That's a condemnation. That goes right against Proverbs 17:15 there. It's an abomination to the Lord. Period. You can't get around that, people. I'm sorry, but you can't.
Nope. Paul saying Elizabeth and Zacharias couldn't have been righteous because they kept the law. It's not possible, according to Paul.
All right. Well, let's end the cliffhanger here and let's show them the true context of what Paul's citing, because, like you said, he kind of omitted the beginning of the chapter.
Kinda.
Yeah.
A little bit. You know what I'm saying? Shh.
So everyone, if y'all don't believe what we say, check out Romans 3:9. Romans 3 in your Bible app is going to give you a cross-reference. And it's going to cross-reference you to Psalm 14. So this is verse 1. This is the context.
To the chief musician of David, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God, they are corrupt, they have done abominable deeds, there is none that does good. Do all the evildoers have no knowledge? He who eat up my people, who eat up my people like they eat bread and call not on the Lord, they were in great fear, for God is in the generation of the righteous.
Oh,
we got some problems going on here.
Oh.
So Paul says Paul omits The fool has said in his heart, there is no God, they are corrupt. They have done abominable deeds. There is none that does good.
Yeah,
so
my man Paul said it was everybody. My man Paul said it's everybody.
He said it's everybody. But right here, it clearly says the fool has said in his heart. The fool. So a fool that says there is no God, today we call that an atheist.
Yeah.
So only the atheist doesn't do good, not just anybody. That kind of, that's very deceitful.
That's establishing your context there. That's establishing what the subsequent parts of the psalm are going to be about. And we're also going to cite Psalm 53. And just a little tidbit, you're going to like this, Davon. There's a reason Psalm 14 and Psalm 53 are basically exactly the same. Like, why put two psalms in that are exactly the same? Well, Rashi brings down that Psalm 14, just like Isaiah 14, is about Nebuchadnezzar. He's wicked, doesn't believe in Hashem, right? Exiled the people, destroyed the temple, but God is in the generation of the righteous, right? And then 53 is about Titus, second temple destruction, second commonwealth destruction. Evil person, doesn't revere God. But God is in the generation of the righteous. So how does that work? How does that mesh with Paul? If the psalm itself is, in fact, this might be one of the only times you actually have something, prophetic, in the Psalms. And what it's really talking about is the enemies of Israel. Not everybody.
How is God in the generation of the righteous if they can't be righteous?
Right. That's why I included verse 5.
So
if Paul would have read two more verses down,
or started at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see how he cherry picks and omits things to make points? If you have to do that, what are you really standing on here? You can slide to 53.
Okay. Basically the same thing.
The fool, again, context, the fool has said in his heart, not man, not everybody born said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt and have done abominable iniquity. There is none that does good. This is specifically talking about atheists. They have all fallen away. Yep. They have all become filthy. There is no one who does good, not even one. This is the atheist. Have the evildoers no knowledge, who eat up my people as they eat bread? Do they not call upon God? No, the atheist does not call upon God because he's a fool.
Or any wicked person in general.
Yeah, there's nothing out. There's no one out there.
Right.
I can't see him. I can't touch him. I can't taste it. Right. There's no way to grasp God with the human senses. But guess what? You don't see those Wi-Fi beams flying across your room.
Right.
Without it, you can't use your devices.
Mm-hmm.
You know they're there because your device wouldn't work. So if we're going to play that game, there is no Wi-Fi. Right? T-Mobile's lying.
Right.
Every time you walk into a store and you need their Wi-Fi, it doesn't exist. Why are you asking for it? Right? Your phone's lying to you. You don't have Wi-Fi. Show it to me. Prove it. Right? Let me stop. So
but yeah, it's very interesting. When I read that Rashi, I was like, wow, because it is very uncommon to have basically two identical chapters, so, but it just goes to show that Paul pulled this way out of context. This is talking about, of course, the fool says in his heart, there's no God, atheism, but even just wickedness, wicked people who come against Israel. It says eating my people up like bread, right? That means conquering them, Paul just totally omits that. that this is the enemies of the righteous. He's insinuating that this is about all humanity. Where did Paul learn to read? Like, or was he just writing to people who had no idea these verses existed?
Right. Have no context. And what's interesting is when you read about Nebuchadnezzar, you can read about Titus in the Talmud and other sources, but they were shown that there was a God after they denied him. For instance, like you said, who would destroy the temple of God if you knew who he was, right? Okay,
right.
That makes sense. But
I mean, Titus did something pretty nasty on a Torah scroll in the temple. So you don't get much more foolish than that to deny Hashem,
And then he caught a bug in the nose. God said, I'm gonna let you know, I'm gonna use one of the tiniest creatures at my command to show you what time it is. So read about Titus and what went up his nose. And then when you read about Nebuchadnezzar, and
he went mad too.
Yeah. In Daniel chapter 4, he clearly says, I came to know that God is real, and he sets up kingdoms and gives it to who he wants. So he had to get checked. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. You gotta check yourself to know what's really going on. People with power, power corrupts.
Yep.
So, and I mean, we just gonna keep it real. Paul also had power, and he was completely corrupted in the way he saw stuff. He had a mindset of, my gospel is right, and anybody else that don't like it, let them be cursed. But then he turns around and says, do not curse nobody. But we ain't gonna get into that. But so we see where Paul gets his logic of no one can be good because he omits who it's talking about.
Yeah.
How convenient.
Okay. So the conclusion. First of all, I agree that Jesus' death was for nothing. Why? Because, as we see, one can be righteous by keeping the mitzvahs, by living a moral life according to God's code. Paul adamantly disagrees. Therefore, Galatians 2:21 is true. If you can attain righteousness through the law, then Jesus' death was in vain, was for nothing. So I agree.
Yeah. I think Paul's. Go ahead.
Typos in that next. I have some typos in that next one.
Oh, according to the Torah, yeah, no ayah Torah. But Paul's statement is based on he falsified a document. He took something and omitted the beginning, and completely took out of context and ran with it. And unfortunately, many people have bought that verse in Romans as if Romans is correct, but it's not. It's completely out of context. It's tampered with, and the church has convinced everybody that they cannot be righteous without believing in Jesus. And unfortunately, people don't read for themselves and actually, go back and read Deuteronomy 6:25. It says, this will be our righteousness if we keep the commandments. So did they just lie to themselves? That, that doesn't make any sense at all. God told Joshua chapter 1, if you keep my laws, everything you do will succeed. Why would he say that if he knew he couldn't keep those laws? But we see Joshua did succeed. So he had to have kept those laws to get the success he did.
Yeah.
There's no other way. So what's going on? Oh, Paul lied. That's the simple answer. Sorry. He lied. He sold you something to further a narrative to push Jesus on you, which is basically idolatry. But in the Roman world, there was nothing wrong with that. They had idols everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, Paul was definitely a universalist who was willing to pull out everything.
Right. So, in conclusion, Paul lied about Romans 3:9, and go read Psalm 14 for yourself. Read Psalm 53 for yourself and see what he omitted. Put them side by side and see, was he being honest here? And just so you know, in Galatians chapter 1, verse 11 and 12, Paul says everything he taught came from Jesus. So did Jesus tell Paul to omit those verses? I'll let you decide.
Okay, the next point. The New Testament itself declares that there are, in fact, righteous people according to the Torah. We pointed that out. Luke 1, Zechariah and Elizabeth. Right?
Yep.
Christians believe their son was righteous, I'm sure. Right?
Completely.
I don't think any Christian would say that John the Baptist was not a righteous man.
Nope, because Jesus said he was the greatest. So why would he be uplifting a sinner?
Right.
And according to Paul in Romans 2:13, it's not the hearers of the law, but the doers of the law that will be righteous. If that's not possible, why did he say that? And one of my final points is Luke 16:17 says, till heaven and earth pass, not one tittle of the law will fail. So why would not God, oh my goodness, I can't believe I said that. Why would Jesus say that the law would not fail? Why would he point that out if he didn't want you to keep it?
Right.
If it was not good, if it was weak and useless, as we read in Hebrews 7:18, why would he want you to focus on something that's not going to disappear if it doesn't do you any good?
Right.
You know, that's like a doctor telling you to take medicine that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And say, hey man, this medicine is going to work forever. Till heaven and earth pass, this medicine is going to work, but it does you no good. What's the point? Think, please.
It's tough, people. It's tough. It was tough for us to hear this stuff the first time. You know, this isn't some easy subject, but I mean, y'all got to hear it. Next point, Paul's condemnations of none being righteous and therefore deserving of a spiritual death are an abomination before God. Because if Paul wrote Galatians, then he's asserting that John the Baptist, Zechariah in Luke, Elizabeth in Luke, Mary in all the Gospels, Joseph in Matthew, King David, King Solomon, Moses, the list can go on, Noah, Abraham. He's asserting that none of them were righteous except Abraham. But why? Because he had faith and it was counted to him as righteousness. So what's Paul's message? Ditch the law, just have faith. And I'm sure that's the same thing all of y'all hear every Sunday.
Every Sunday. Any given Sunday, right?
Right.
That's
quite the big charge, Paul. That's quite the big charge, Paul.
Huge charge. The thing about Abraham is when we see in Genesis where it says, you know, Abraham had faith in God and was counted to him as righteousness. Sure, nothing wrong with that. But did you read the first 3 chapters of Abraham's life, what he went through to get that faith? He was made rich. He fought wars. He saved Lot. He had Sarah taken from him and given back. Like, he went through some stuff. You know what I mean? So it's not like he just was faithful, right?
Right.
You know, he had some reasons. You know what I'm saying? If God made you rich and then let you fight a war and go save your nephew, and you knew Melchizedek, like there was a lot of stuff going on in his life.
Your mic.
Mike, can't you hear me?
Yeah, it's tripping out. Like I can hear you, but it's that weird trippy noise again.
Okay, well we can wrap this up since something's going on with my mic. So yeah, so there was more going on with Abraham, so can leave it at that.
Cool. Yeah, and final point, just because we don't want to, that noise might be tough for everyone to hear, so I'll just read this last point. But Paul's condemnations misquote and misappropriate the Holy Scriptures to really propose the opposite message. And that's exactly what he did with Psalms 14 and 53. He asserted that it wasn't just regarding the wicked, those who say there is no God. He's asserting that it's everybody, all of humanity. And that's the opposite message. And we even see that in Psalm 14, stating that God is in the generation, God is present in the generation of the righteous. So clearly, Psalm 14 was not saying that the whole world is unrighteous. But Davon, I appreciate it, man. As always, everyone, check out Clouds of Torah on YouTube. Check the description of this video. His books are linked down there. Pick one up, pick two up, pick them all up. I'm sure he would appreciate it. But until next time, everybody, this was the Exodus Project, and we'll see you next time.